Patrick Massakai here. I am here with Amber Booth. So, Amber, tell us about yourself. Introduce yourself to our group.
All right. I am Amber Booth McCoy, your favorite diversity specialist. I go by Amber Nicole most often. I am the manager of intercultural education in the Division for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as well as the senior diversity specialist. And so essentially I serve as an internal consultant for our entire institution as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then outside of UAMS, I have a diversity consulting firm, and I also sit on a city commission I sit on the Racial and Cultural Diversity Commission, of which I was just the vice chair for several years.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us today. I know you've got a super busy schedule. We were saying before the start of the video that it seems like you said it's like month 36 or 37 of 2020.
It is definitely 30. We are 37 months into 2020 at this point.
Yeah. So we're going to talk today about unconscious bias. And we'll talk about, well, actually, I took one or two tests.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we'll talk about that a little bit. And then, but first, can we define unconscious bias a little bit? Because I want to just make sure for our students it isn't like just a buzz phrase we're using.
Okay. Unconscious bias are going to be the attitudes, beliefs, and ideas that we hold, and we don't hold them consciously. These are essentially patterns or associations that we've made over time. And some of which, like, are explicit biases. These we know, like, what's your favorite color?
Mine is probably blue, right?
All right, see, it's like, ooh, you have a bias for blue, right? That's a explicit bias. But our unconscious biases, these are associations that we've made, and many times about populations, individuals, or groups or identities, and they can, of course, be harmful. But even if they are positive, they can be harmful. It's kind of like how we often assume that people who wear glasses are, go ahead, fill it in. There you go. Right? So like that's an unconscious, if you will, association that we've associated this, even though we know information to the contrary. I'm sure we've met someone with glasses, not the brightest bulb in the box, but that's how strong those biases can be.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess the next question, jumping off point, is how do these biases affect our daily work life?
So your implicit associations and the ideas that you hold, even unconsciously, are going to affect your intrapersonal communication, so communication with yourself, your interpersonal communication, meaning every interaction that you have with other individuals, and it's going to come out in your behaviors and even your decision making. And so if you don't know what that script is running in the back of your head, then it's kind of like Carl Jung that says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
So sort of understand, it's like a set of invisible scripts that we have.
And it most certainly is.
All right.
If you don't figure out what that script is, then. Whew.
Yeah. How do these develop for most people? Do you have an answer for that?
So they come through our background, experiences, media, and then very often, more often than not, repeated exposure to stereotypical identities and such is how we make those associations over and over. If we were watching a movie and there were a woman sitting on the couch and she was heartbroken and she was wrapped in a Snuggie and she had tissues everywhere and she was crying, what is she eating?
Haagen-Dazs. That's my guess.
She's so eating ice cream, right?
Yes.
Like she's eating ice cream. Now that is an association or pattern that you made, not realizing that you made it, but you were able to pull from it. See? That one is benign, but the other associations that we've made aren't always as benign.
Once we've made these associations, how can they evolve and change over time?
So once you learn what the associations are, you are able to unlearn, if you will, or de-bias yourself. Bias is a natural phenomenon that is supposed to protect us. It was supposed to allow us to look across the pond and know that a saber-toothed tiger was not a pet, right? It helps us to process friend versus foe. The thing is, we also often have what's called affinity bias, and we all like things that are similar to ourselves. That is just human nature. If you've had a best friend or a new love interest anytime in your life, you probably said, we have so much in common. And what you really just said is, I like myself. That's what you said.
True.
So that's affinity bias. So that's very much how it plays out.
Okay. Interesting. So I will say I took a couple. So when we did this last year, I took a couple of implicit bias tests. The one that we talked about most was black white.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually in the middle of the scale. I think when I looked at the implicit bias test, most people were like moderate or mildly preferring white over
The white
black.
face.
I took it again, and I was the same on that one, which was a surprise. I sort of anticipated some change in one direction or the other. Mostly because you're cooped up in, in the last year, we've been cooped up and you're not surrounded by as many people as you are.
True.
So I was just sort of anticipating some sort of change one, but I stayed there.
But did you change your media? Did you change what you were ingesting? Did you watch different shows?
Thinking back, I don't think I did. I think I stuck with the same media that I consume. Yeah, that's a good point. So I didn't really change on that. And sort of, for me at least, it's NPR, BBC for my information.
Well, I say that because I encourage people to look for the windows and mirrors.
Mm-hmm.
Windows are if someone's sharing a story about their life and you can't see yourself reflected and you can't identify that's a window for you. If someone is sharing a story about their life and you can see yourself reflected and you can identify that's a mirror for you. If everything that you watch, if you will, are mirrors for you and not enough windows, then it's going to be harder to break those biases because of affinity bias. We get in our comfort zones, if you will.
Yeah, maybe social media is like that for a lot of us too.
Very much so.
Yeah,
we follow people that say the things that we like.
Yeah, I've admittedly started. I'm on social media, but I don't do much with it. Probably for that.
It is a whole job. Being on social media is a job.
Yeah, so I've stayed away from that. So, but that surprised me a little bit. That stayed the same. I also did a different one. There was one implicit bias test that was interesting. It was science majors and humanities majors.
And gender.
And gender, yes.
Oh, that hurt my feelings when I took that one.
So I went with I leaned moderately towards women in humanities, men in science.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for me, again, your conscious beliefs and your unconscious can differ. And that one hurt my feelings. The rest of them, I was like, oh, okay. But I created the Junior STEM Academy that we have here at UAMS and the Senior STEM Academy. My sister's an OBGYN. I have women faculty friends and such. So, I mean, that was very shocking. That one was shocking to me that I had that. And it was a strong association for women in humanities and men in science. Yeah,
I mean, my wife is a surgeon here and was what the heck was she majoring? Something complicated, chemistry.
See?
Yeah, she laughs at me as a genetics major. She's like, that was like one easy course for us. And my mom, went to medical school and graduated too. She's not practicing now, but yeah, right. So despite that just came up that way. I don't know.
So I took the one for career. Did you take the one for career in family?
That sounds like an interesting one.
I took that one and I had an association. I had no automatic association. And I did think that one was cool because I did have two working parents growing up. My mother was always a businesswoman, my father. But even in my home, our roles don't look like traditional gender roles. Like my husband does a lot more of the cleaning sometimes and I cook. And it's just, we don't really have those roles, if you will. Yeah.
It's interesting what would happen if I took that because my parents were more in a traditional role that way. Because my mom actually stopped practicing when there's me and my two other siblings. And so she stopped practicing to take care of us. But I think I was pretty conscious about marrying someone who's going to be professional. I mean, decided consciously actually not to have kids. So
listen, there are lots.
Yeah. So, and she was very much like, very much for that when we were dating. So I was like, okay. So it'd be interesting to see what would happen if I took that one. So I guess the follow-up question is, what do we do with that information?
So I encourage people to take the Harvard Implicit Association test so they know the script running in the back of their head. After you know that script, and I do not encourage people to take like all 5 at one time, because just take 2 and work on unlearning those biases. So there are a couple of things. Let's say for the light skin, dark skin, that's one. And I think I may have shared last time I was here that the first time I took it, I had a moderate preference for lighter skin. And that was very bothersome to me. So I had to work on that. I started purposefully following accounts of very, very dark individuals from other countries. I started, every time one popped up on a timeline, I would create these narratives, like these positive images, and I would start to associate positive identities with that identity, right? Positive attributes and characteristics. So that's one thing you can do, right? That, and the other thing is to purposefully get out and interact with those people that you consider to be others, whatever that is. If that is, we took the test that says we have women in humanities, and I'm sure that we probably know lots of, I have a whole psychology degree. So, but we would have to be intentional about getting out and, hanging out with women in STEM purposefully, not just the ones in our family, not just our friends, but, actual events and things like that. I tell people, if you go somewhere and you know more than 3 people, that's a party. You're not networking. You're not, So the goal is to be uncomfortable and to allow others around you to inform you when you have maybe committed a microaggression or microinequity, right? Because those things are based on bias and they're going to come out in your communication.
Can you define those terms a little bit for us too? Microinequity, especially that one I had not, I'm not as familiar with.
So a microaggression, and it was coined, I do believe, by Dr. Chester Pierce in the 70s. And a microaggression are those little bitty snubs or slights that basically devalue individuals based on their identity. Microaggressions are typically focused towards race or ethnicity. Those are going to sound like things such as, where are you really from? Or you speak good English.
Yes,
when,
yes.
Someone can have a whole Ghanaian, ethnicity and English be their first language.
Yeah.
And so, or it is, I don't see color. Like, that is a microaggression, because if you are not blind and you are not colorblind, you see this Hershey, right? And it's okay to see color. Microinequities, that was later done by a woman named Mary Rowe, and and she wanted to expand what Dr. Pierce had done and make it more suitable about gender and such. So those are, again, you can think about microinequities or microaggressions as like paper cuts. You're not going to die from a paper cut, but 1,000 paper cuts a day is no way to live. And so essentially unrepresented or marginalized populations, they get hit with microinequities or microaggressions more often than others.
Yeah. I definitely felt it when you brought up you speak really good English. Right. Where are you really from? I get that.
Or you are so articulate. I really like that. Is one that just really bothers me.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's the intent and the impact is what it is. Intent doesn't always equal impact. It doesn't have to be ill-intended, but it does impact the target.
Yeah, that's right. It's hard from my end to separate what their intention was from what I'm actually receiving emotionally from that.
Right. Which is another, I have to talk about those things in my workshops as well. Like what to do when you receive a microinequity.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, what do you do? Because I mean, for me, I get 2 that you mentioned. I also get, how old are you really? Like, and so my response has to be like, I'm old enough to be your doctor. Sorry.
So a couple of things. One, if it is you and it was towards you, I use the ouch rule, honestly. Somebody says something and it impacts me, I say, ouch. And sometimes I'm dramatic and I go, ouch, like I do a whole hand move. One, it allows the other person to know that something has occurred. Something has happened. It doesn't make anyone right or wrong, but it allows us the ability to talk about it, right? Because what happens most often is that individuals who get hit with microaggressions and microinequities frequently, they become small. They stop bringing their multidimensional self, because it's like that's what part gets stabbed or cut, right?
Yeah.
So allowing you to talk about it means that neither of you have to carry it around. And there's a difference between calling in and calling out. If someone says something wrong and you're calling that person out, a lot of times that's done to embarrass or shame that person. Whereas if you are calling in, you are really truly seeking to educate and kind of flesh out the conversation more, so that person doesn't do that going forward.
How do you approach the conversations that you're calling in instead of calling out? Because I think for most of us, the way that we present this is a call out. I think that's probably how we're best practiced. I know that's the case for me. That this frontal lobe works overtime.
And so the first thing is, let's say someone says something. Start with the why. ask them the question and flesh out the conversation, right? Make sure that you understand what it is that you think you're upset about in the first place. Let's say somebody, so you can say, what did you mean by that? Or can you help me understand like what that statement means, and allow them to share, right? Very often, if they know that it was a not nice statement, then they're going to want to fix it or change it anyway. But not being immediately on the defensive and being able to kind of get in a space where you're able to have the conversation definitely is it allows both of you to be in a better space, basically.
Okay, so open it up into sort of neutral session.
I mean, you can still say out and discuss how you were impacted, maybe, right? Because they may not have intended it that way, but it doesn't mean that it didn't, right, that it didn't land, and that's okay. So
yeah, because they probably aren't, they're almost certainly not aware of what that means to other people.
Right.
Yeah, especially when they're saying those things, right? So we've talked about approaching this as an individual. If you're in a team or an organization that's trying to change these things, what should that approach look like, no matter what the bias is?
So it has to be continual. First and foremost, it has to start with leadership. And that is one reason I genuinely and truly appreciate Dr. Patterson. Dr. Patterson is, leaders have to seek to be what it's called culturally responsive. So it is necessary for them to be able to recognize where they stand, where they hold power and privilege. And that's for all of us, not just, our leaders, where you hold power and privilege. And then are you making space or creating space for others? Like, that's what I like to think of the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's making space. A lot of times, I think one of the myths about DEI is people talk about it like it's pie, and inclusion for some means less inclusion for someone else, but it's more like water. It's the strongest force on earth if we do it right. If people don't have to not be who they are, if everyone can bring their multidimensional selves, we could solve every single problem. I mean, you name it, every single problem I genuinely believe can be solved through the lens of DEI.
Yeah. And I think even, at this point too, I'm pretty sure you could bring up data on this, but at least I've heard data that the more diverse your group and your team is at work, the more successful you are, whether you're measuring.
Very much so.
Right? Whether it's like you're a business trying to make money, or whatever you may be doing.
Diversity is profitable. Diversity makes money. One, diverse groups have a higher, they're able to have a higher analytical skill, right? Because they're going to banter back and forth. They're going to have different backgrounds and experiences at the table. They're typically more invigorated because they're able to have such conversations and the ideas. And you have to take into account, that's just diversity. That's not even saying that you're being inclusive and equitable, right? Just having diverse people at the table, it makes a difference in every single field.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about it in the last few years, and I've always felt like if I don't think about other people, I'm losing if I'm going to use a completely cold word, customer base, if I don't consider these other points of view, right?
That's it. Intentional inclusivity, I always say, is moving from asking who's at the table, because that's what we do, to asking who's not at the table, who should be at the table. Did they get detailed instructions to the table? And then upon arrival, a microphone and a chair, right? Like, if you are, no matter what the project is, you have to know who your stakeholders are, and you have to make sure that those voices are heard, right? So that's where the intentional part comes in.
All right. So leadership is a big part of that. How about if so for a lot of us, we're sort of at the bottom of that, we're just coming up. So what can we do? And then as we work our way towards the middle and up, like, how does that approach change?
There are little bitty everyday things. In how many languages can you say hello?
3 for myself.
So learn 3 more.
Yeah.
We are in an institution where people come from around the world. We have like 80 countries represented in just our workforce alone. And you have to think about even the populations that we serve. Learn how to say hello. If you are in if you have creativity or license to change your office space, put hello in different languages there. Is the artwork reflective of the population that you're serving? When we talk about those windows and mirrors, is everybody looking in mirrors, if you will, when they come in your space, because there's nothing that reflects them. Like that just makes everyone feel warm, you know? And then definitely just getting to know people by just saying hello, like just allowing each and every person. So culture humility is what each and every one of us can do. Just allowing each person to be the owner of their own experience.
It's interesting, as we've gone through this course and had different speakers, one of the biggest running themes is just sort of getting to know people and being human. It's sort of like a big common denominator in all this.
I check in differently with my teams, even at the beginning of meetings now since the pandemic, you know, because I mean, we never know what individuals are dealing with. When you think about all of the many variables that went on when people were quarantined, then they may not have the bandwidth to even have meetings, and some meetings can be emails. So yes, absolutely
true. All right, those are the sort of the main things that I have off the top of my head. I think we have one person. If they have a question, feel free to send it through the chat. But can I want to see do you have any closing thoughts and ideas that we should turn towards the end with?
So, one, bias is natural. We all have it. You can't outthink it, and it has nothing to do with morality, right? It is acknowledging that we've made associations, every last one of us. Two, you've made the associations, own the associations, and then take a flashlight to yourself. Review, like if you're going to take the Harvard Implicit Association test, review how you think you got that result. Like, what about your life made you, come up with that? You're welcome to call your favorite diversity specialist, and I will unpack these things with you. And then three, continue to look for the windows and mirrors. Continue to look for stories that are different from your own and begin to value those. Very often we talk about how we all bleed red or we all this. It's okay to be different. And it is okay to value those differences and to affirm those differences. So seek out those differences.
Awesome. I think too, one of the big takeaways for me is the first part of that, which is the bias is natural.
It is.
And so I think.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, when I did the test last time, I was like feeling really guilty about even like, oh no, where's this going to come up? And now I'm like, okay, let's just see where this goes.
I mean, and which is why if I'm doing a workshop, I give all of mine first. I lay all of my biases bare, and even how I've moved the needle, because I've moved the needle on several of them. But the thing is, our brain has to be able to process 11 million pieces of data per second. And bias is how it lets us do that. Bias are those shortcuts. But the thing is, there are shortcuts that are killing people, honestly, in the healthcare field.
And it's almost like what we're talking about is sort of taking that fast thinking processing for us and taking time to slow it down, right?
Slow it down.
Slow it down. Right.
I mean, so what I do to interrupt it is I take a pause, because your first initial assessment or judgment, that is the bias, right? That's what bias is. If you're able to know what that is, then question that, kind of unravel that. Like, okay, am I really thinking this? Am I thinking this because of this? Be honest with yourself, right? There are, could be times that you don't like this child, but really you don't like the parent. Are you taking it out on the, so you got to be mindful. You got to be intentional about doing the work. We each have work to do.
Yeah, no, you're right. Like, even and completely separate from this topic, like just thinking about thinking fast and thinking slow. When I was a young attending or a senior resident, when I was doing home call for the first time, there were definitely a lot of times where I would make a split decision at the phone. Granted, it's 2 a.m. Hang up and go, oh, I should have said this. Call back and go, I'm sorry. And then I realized, right, it's that fast thinking where you're like, autopilot. I'm missing a thing. Exactly.
Bias is autopilot. That's exactly what bias is. How you get to your desk and you have no idea how you walk there. You're like, how did I hear? That's that bias. Those are those association, those heuristics. So just slowing down and acknowledging that you're going to lean on that fast brain if you're in a rush. But
and like you said, there's nothing right or wrong with having those. You just got to know and get better at it.
That's it.
Awesome. All right. Any other final thoughts? But otherwise, this has been awesome.
No, continue to do the work. Silence is collusion. So if you hear something and you say nothing, you've colluded with what was said.
Mm-hmm.
Advocacy and activism is loud. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.